G'day mate, 40 here. So I saw The Day After Tomorrow. I know that climate change is just going to revolutionize our lives. Right? Billions of people are going to have to pick up and move because climate change is just going to make the nation state as we know it just unviable. On the other hand, right, all our institutions, our textbooks, our academic divisions, right, it's all based around nation states, individual nation states, and a major point of emphasis since the Second World War is that the nation state is inviolable, right? It cannot change, and so God forbid that the people of Gaza be moved out of Gaza because they should never move. On the other hand, people in the Middle East, billions of them, all have the right to move to Europe. People in Africa, they all have the right to move to Europe. So Germany accepted 2 million refugees from Syria. So Germany's borders are not inviolable, right? Because a person from Syria, that's just the same as a person from Japan or a person from Norway, right? Everybody's just the same. But nation states are inviolable. But billions of us are going to have to move out of our nation state into another nation state because of global warming. Like some of these messages that I'm getting, right, they don't fully cohere, which is why people who don't buy into the mainstream consensus, the elite consensus, right, they don't care so much about awful terms like ethnic cleansing when it comes to Gaza, because anyone who knows anything about history knows that when you repeatedly lose wars, you'll very likely be moved, if not slaughtered. And the Gazans have been declaring war on the Jewish state for about 50 years, and they've lost, and they may need to be moved. But God, it's inviolable. The Gazan state, which is not technically a state, but it's inviolable for some reason, even though it's only ever been ruled by other parties. It's never been an independent nation state. But then billions of us are going to have to move because of climate change. You saw The Day After Tomorrow, right? So I was shagging mad the first time I watched it with the lovely Haley Rivers. But then we got back together the second night. We actually watched the movie, and I got the message about climate change. It's serious, and it shows millions of Americans pouring into Mexico, seeking refuge, seeking shelter, and the Mexicans being super chill and kind and very generous and warm towards us because of climate change, guys. Climate change is just going to send billions of people moving all over the world, so we can't be too hung up on nation states. But for some reason, when it comes to Gaza and the West Bank, right, this particular territory for the Palestinians is just inviolable. But on the other hand, if people don't want illegal immigrants into the United States, or they want an end to immigration to the United States, well, you can't have that. Anyone in the world is entitled to move to the United States, right? Every Mexican's entitled to just up and move. It's racist to then deny them government welfare, government services. But then we got climate change, so billions of people are going to be moving. So what the hell is really going on? Right? It's these contradictory messages that make it hard to take arguments about international law quite so seriously. President Trump just signed an executive order mandating an audit of all NGOs that receive federal funding. Right, post on X. Great irony of present geopolitical doctrine is the inviolability and sacred nature of national borders on the one hand, and the fact that literally every last brown person can cross them on the other hand if it's into a white or a Jewish country, right? You got the right of the return to the Jewish state of Israel. And what about what we've been told about climate change? Billions of us are supposed to move because of climate change. It's strange that there is this enormous obsession with physical borders staying the same, but on the other hand, we're told that people are just basically interchangeable. It doesn't matter who lives where. Right? So with all these mixed messages, it reduces elite credibility and institutional credibility just a tad. But in case you're not sufficiently panicked, guys, the United States Senate has confirmed Trump's Cromwell. One of my favorite columnists in the New York Times is a lefty, Thomas Edsall, but he really strives to be fair. And headline from his February 4 column, Trump's Cromwell is waiting in the wings. 3 years ago, Russell Vogt, President Trump's choice to become director of the Office of Management and Budget, argued that the stark reality in America is that we're in the late stages of a complete Marxist takeover of the country, in which our adversaries already hold the weapons of the government apparatus and they have aimed it at us. Okay, I think that's a tad hyperbolic. But I understand how exciting that worldview is, and if it energizes him to do mostly good and right things, then I'm down. Vogt views American life as a life or death struggle between the God-fearing right and a malevolent secular left. Okay. In a 2022 essay in The American Mind, reviewing America's American purpose, Vogt gives his assessment of the Biden administration. Scary part is this regime is now increasingly arrayed against the American people. It is both woke and weaponized. The national security state, with organs like the FBI, NSA, CIA, are aligned against the American people who are outraged by this revolution they never assented to. That is how tens of millions of Americans experience many government agencies, right? When you get off the plane in Australia and you're an Australian, you feel like you're coming home, right? You get off the plane in Los Angeles or New York and you feel like you are the enemy. You're treated like the enemy by the people who process you through immigration. So in Australia, you very much have a sense that the government is on your side. But in America, you're very likely to often have the sense that the government is arrayed against you. The FBI is investigating concerned parents attending open school board meetings as a domestic terrorist. Right, 40% of FBI agents were put on January 6th. None of them were put on Antifa, Black Lives Matter terrorism, which did far more damage and instigated changes in American life, a pullback in policing that have led to approximately 30,000 deaths, 30,000 unnecessary deaths due to the Ferguson effect, due to Black Lives Matter. So the Ferguson effect is what happens when Black Lives Matter agitates, elites side with Black Lives Matter, and then police say, okay, we'll stop doing our job. The FBI are putting political opponents in jail. The NSA is surveilling the conversations of citizens. The hour is late. Time is of the essence to expose the charade, rally the country toward self-government once again, seize every leverage point to arrest the damage. Vogt wrote in Newsweek in 2021, is there anything wrong with Christian nationalism? Well, what is called Christian nationalism today would be normal Christianity 50 years ago. But when the secular tide has flowed so much into our previously religious country that it takes a great deal more effort to try to maintain a Christian or a religious outlook in increasingly secular times. And so you have to be much more strident if you want to maintain a serious Christian identity today. And this strident Christianity can be described as Christian nationalism, which is not to say that there aren't total lunatics and dangerous people who call themselves Christian nationalists as well as many fine people. So I don't have an instinctive fear of Christian nationalism. I don't have an instinctive veneration of it. I would say overall I am favorably disposed. So Russell Vogt is a lauded Trump loyalist on the verge of his second tour of duty with the president, one of the most powerful posts in the federal government. Yes, he got confirmed by the U.S. Senate today. He has a vision of the apocalyptic battle for the soul of America. It takes a lot of energy to get anything done. And so if you think that you are fighting the forces of evil and that you are on the side of God and goodness and that the Democrats are increasingly evil, I can understand why that would be incredibly energizing, and that may well be adaptive. So he views the federal workforce as the enemy that must be forced into submission. Look, the federal workforce donates to Democrats 20-1, so it's understandable why Republicans would have some skepticism about the federal workforce. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they're increasingly viewed as the villains. Vogt declared last year. We want to put them in trauma. I don't agree with that. Right? Many federal workers are doing great work. Many government agencies are doing great work. There's no inherent reason that if it's being done by the government, it's shoddy, it's sloppy, it's crappy, it's commie. Right? There are many government functions that are vitally important and are being done exceptionally well. And we should be grateful for hardworking government workers. All right? There are hardworking government workers. We shouldn't trash them.
Jesse Waters, prime time tonight.
What is the general feeling across government?
Grief. They're angry, many that are confused.
The shadow government is getting doged.
The future is gonna be amazing! they say, the most successful 2 weeks in the history of any presidency. Now all we have to do is keep it going for another couple of 100 weeks.
Trump has a need for speed.
Step on it, Willie.
This political party, this is a cadre of criminals and losers. This party lied to me while stealing my tax dollars.
The Democrats have fallen, and they can't get up.
Y'all are never going to win another political race ever again.
Plus,
do you want to spend your tax-paying dollars on Sesame Street in Iraq?
Sesame Street in Iraq?
the Doge father's on the loose, and no federal job is safe. Their plan for the deep state? Gut it all. Over 40,000 federal bureaucrats have already taken buyouts, and we're only in week 3.
We expect that number to increase, and that alone, just the 40,000, again, we expect it to increase. It's going to save the American people tens of millions of dollars, and we encourage federal workers in this city to accept the very generous offer. If they don't want to show up to the office, if they want to rip the American people off, then they're welcome to take this buyout, and we'll find highly competent individuals who want to fill these roles.
Elon and his nerd army have been combing through agencies, blasting away bloat. 20-year-old Dozers are clashing with lazy old-timers who don't know how to use a computer and are calling them idiots. And breaking news, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has just fired 90% of the administrators at USAID. They took a 10,000-man agency and streamlined it to 300 employees. The media is calling it the Trumpocalypse. CNN castoff Oliver Darcy says the American experiment is convulsing before our eyes. And he's flabbergasted that the media hasn't gone into round-the-clock special coverage before our eyes. Quote, media executives need not fret about being the boy who cried wolf. The wolf is now in the barn and mauling the livestock. The Democrats and the media have never seen a president execute a mandate with speed and precision. The country voted for change, and we're watching representative government in the 21st century. The feds, they call that war.
Nobody wants to work in this type of condition where we're going to be in a psychological warfare for how long?
Other federal workers, not revealing their names because of concern over retribution, described to NBC News fear and panic, an Orwellian nightmare.
Federal workers are worried about payback and psychological warfare. How do you think the whole country's felt for the last 20 years? Having to tiptoe around DEI, hauled into HR for jokes, canceled for an opinion, watching Black Lives Matter light us on fire. A guy wearing a dress raped a girl in the girl's bathroom, and the girl's dad got arrested for raising his voice. A DEI bureaucrat at the Department of Justice making 6 figures who's going to get a buyout with an 8-month severance deal. They're not a victim. CNN's putting spot shadows on feds like their lives are in danger.
What is the general feeling across government amongst your fellow federal workers right now?
Grief. They're angry, many that are confused, but all kind of grieving in their own way.
How does it feel to be targeted for the work that you're so passionate about? It's okay, you could take your time.
It actually makes me prouder of the people that I've worked with and the things that we've done.
CNN spot shadowing a woman who's worked from home, and now she's crying because she doesn't want to go back to the office? This is insane. CNN just laid off hundreds of employees to cut costs because their books aren't balanced because no one's watching them. No one's interviewing fired CNN staff, not even Don Lemon. Getting fired isn't a war crime. I've been fired 4 times. And thank God, because it turned out all right. Since when has CNN cared about people losing their jobs? They didn't weep when Biden waxed the Keystone Pipeline workers. CNN's been trying to get everybody fired at Fox for years. If CNN doesn't like what you say, they call your boss, they call your advertisers, they try to bankrupt you and boycott you. Random Americans who crack jokes on Facebook. CNN was putting them on blast, trying to get him canceled. CNN cheered on Biden for firing Army officers who didn't get vaxxed. Guys who were willing to die for this country. CNN said, good, get them out of here. CNN's boss can lay off people. Why can't Trump? Bill Clinton fired almost 400,000 federal workers. That wasn't a constitutional crisis. The government had to slim down. Bill and Newt cut the fat, balanced the budget. And Democrats are acting like we're witnessing a genocide.
Let me remind you who set the House on fire. It was y'all. It feels as if y'all have just decided that y'all are going to castrate your constitutional duty and hand it over to someone who is unelected.
Fire Elon Musk. Elon Musk took control of our country's financial nuclear codes.
House Republicans have allowed billionaire Elon Musk and his gang of thieves to enter the U.S. Treasury Department, fire the people entrusted with secret private information about Americans, and give them that access.
Elon Musk is destroying our federal government. He feels he bought himself a president.
Now we've got Donald Trump and his co-president Elon Musk, and they're just running a wrecking ball through it.
Democrats want to audit you for a $600 Venmo payment. But when Elon audits the trillion-dollar government, they're ready to storm the castle. Why are Democrats shocked? We're putting the government on a diet. Trump and Musk campaigned on it and won on it.
We're going to be very open and transparent and be very clear about this is what we're doing. Here are the issues. This is the math for what's being spent and what, you know, and we're going to make it. We're going to make the spending lower. And if somebody's got a better idea for how to make the spending lower, tell us. But if we don't, we're going to bankrupt the country.
I will create a government efficiency commission tasked with conducting a complete financial and performance audit of the entire federal government and making recommendations for drastic reforms. As the first order of business, this commission will develop an action plan to totally eliminate fraud and improper payments within 6 months. This will save trillions of dollars, trillions.
Democrats aren't surprised this is Trump's agenda. They're surprised he's able to execute it. Because after years of incompetence, no one thought anyone was capable of doing anything in Washington. Elon says there's a way to know when you're over the target.
One of the things I remember from the PayPal days was that, you know who complains the loudest is the fraudsters. Okay, so when somebody was trying to commit fraud at PayPal, where we would see the most amount of righteous indignation, like it would be like immediate over-the-top righteous indignation, was from the fraudsters, not from honest people. Because honest people are like, oh, I think there's something wrong with my account. I wonder what's wrong. Let me inquire. But the fraudsters will come at you immediately. It's like a tell that someone's actually doing fraud, because the level of sort of faux outrage is way over the top.
Elon doesn't care about bad press. He's trying to save the republic. It's good cop, bad cop. Trump's the good cop. He's the bad cop.
We're catching him left and right. We're catching him. We're catching them to a point where they don't know what the heck is going on. They can't believe they're getting caught. And I have great respect for the people that are doing it. Elon Musk is helping us on it. And he's pretty good. He's pretty good.
The government's been robbing us blind. We've been writing checks, $6 million for tourism in Egypt. Like Egypt needs help with that. They have the pyramids. We should be spending money on cleaning up California so that tourists can vacation in California. $2 million to help the BBC value the diversity of Libyan society. We're bribing the BBC to cover Libya better? Why? $1 million for a gay group in Armenia. There it is. We paid $20 million for Iraqi Sesame Street. You paid for Bert and Ernie in Baghdad. Weren't we just bombing these people? Now we're paying for their Muppet shows? We're sick. There is something sick with us. You also paid for an Irish DEI musical.
On behalf of Ambassador Cronin, it is an honor to welcome all of her guests to Deerfield tonight for this important event. Increasing access to opportunity and equity is a cornerstone of the Biden administration, and we're so proud to play a small part in that here.
This is a government theft ring. We spent $2 million for trans surgeries in Guatemala. I'm going to go out on a limb. One Guatemalan dude got breast implants. And we probably kicked back the rest of the cash to a crooked Guatemalan politician and the corrupt liberal CEO of the group they laundered the money through. Because all this money we're spending, we could have turned the whole world trans. We could have made every man a woman and every woman a man with this kind of money. Do you really think it costs $20 million to produce an episode of Sesame Street? You could hire Tom Cruise to play Oscar the Grouch for that money. Check this. Biden paid nearly $5 billion to unnamed foreign sources. Whoever's getting our money is so shady, our government can't even put it in writing. They just call it aid. I bet a lot of this money is to bribe foreign officials to win bids for American companies, or to bribe foreign politicians just to have in our pockets, or just to subsidize far-left foundations. Most of the people getting money from these grants aren't in the country. They pump it into overseas organizations, and then we never see them. Any liberal with an international women's studies degree can launch a 501c3, apply for a government grant, and spin it off into a left-wing piggy bank. USAID paid $235 million to the National Democratic Institute. Okay, well, that sounds benign. No, millions of that money went to executive compensation, meaning salaries for all the liberals with no skills. I bet most of that money didn't go to supporting democracy. It went to supporting liberal lifestyles. Democrats have been sucking off the teat of government for decades, and Trump caught them. As one Trump insider says, you bring USAID to heel, and you end the Democrat gravy train. USAID is just the beginning. You start peeling back at the layers of every agency, and all you find out is pork that winds up in the wrong people's pockets.
The White Coat Waste Project exposed more than $10 million in taxpayer funds that were spent creating transgender mice, rats, and monkeys. The Biden-Harris administration spent $2.5 million taxpayer dollars, $2.5 million taxpayer dollars to study the fertility of transgender mice. We spent over $1 million to find out if female rats receiving testosterone therapy were more likely to overdose on a date rape drug.
One of those multi-million-dollar studies was at the University of Michigan. How much do you want to bet a Democrat wants to go to a game at Ann Arbor? Front row seats. Anyone from the Biden team wants to land at Ann Arbor? Here's an office, a campus, an apartment, and a no-show job with benefits. Government's fed the pigs so much it turned into a hog. You know what happens to hogs? They get slaughtered. And the American people love a good butcher.
This political party, the Democratic Party, have lied to us about everything. What the last several weeks have proven to us all is that this is a cadre of criminals and losers and spoiled children of affluent parents who were more concerned about looking good than actually doing good. Now we come to USAID being probably the largest money laundering operation in American history. Congratulations, Dems. You've outdone even Bernie Madoff.
Manhattan Institute senior fellow Chris Rufo joins me. All right, Chris, you know a lot about this DEI corruption gravy train. So if you have some lesbian Sesame Street episode in Baghdad for 20 mil, where is that 20 million actually going?
Well, we know exactly where these kind of grants go. They are padding the pockets of left-wing activists in the United States and abroad. the government is the single largest benefactor of left-wing ideologies anywhere on the planet. These are ideologies that are popular nowhere except for a few pockets of East Coast and West Coast cities. But when the public sees waste, the left sees patronage. That's exactly what this is. They're taking hard-earned taxpayer cash from every Trump voter in the United States, and they're giving it to the gender theorists. They're giving it to the critical race ideologies. They're giving it to the DEI activists. Trump is right to shut it down. Elon Musk is exactly the man for the job. He's laser focused. I was at the White House yesterday, and everyone is buzzing about these Doge boys going in and getting the keys to the castle, rooting out this waste. And that's why the left is squealing, because they're losing their lifeline and they're losing the only way that they can survive.
So this money is like a meal plan for the liberal army. And you send it, let's say, to a, what was that, like a DEI opera in Ireland? So that's like what, Joe Biden's cousin's opera? Is that how this works?
Yeah, it could be. I would actually love to see the opera. That would be something fun to watch. But look, there's no shortage of examples. I saw one last night on the database that was teaching transgender, pansexual, and non-binary people in New York City how to farm vegetables. It's not really clear. Were they making a pansexual plantation? I'm not really sure what it was. But the fact is that the reason that left-wing activists can show up on a Tuesday morning and protest in any major city is because the government is paying their bills through these NGOs. The American people should not stand for it. It's time to shut it down.
I didn't know the soil was so fertile here in Manhattan. What is a pansexual, by the way?
A pansexual is someone who appreciates and loves all different bodies, sexualities, and identities. It's essentially taking the bar and putting it all the way to the bottom. If it moves, if it breathes, they're interested.
Okay. I'm scared that you know that, Rufo, but thank you for answering accurately. We
Only
like that.
through research, not through personal experience, Jesse.
All right. Chris Rufo knows a lot about this. It looks like this is going to never stop. Thank you so much.
So much winning. Christopher Rufo, the most effective conservative right-wing activist since the 1970s. I mean, this guy is doing the Lord's work. How much money did Luke get? I got nothing, man. I don't play the game, all right? I'm not one of those go along to get along. No, I'm never going to be able to tap that kind of gravy train. Don't think that's heading for me anytime soon. All right, New York Times is bemoaning the new head of Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought. So he was confirmed today. So he's determined to wipe out any vestiges of Democratic control in the U.S. government. Well, given that bureaucrats seem to be about 10-1 on the left, or Democrats rather than Republicans, maybe this is a really good thing. In December 2022, he wrote that Democratic control had resulted in the emergence of political prisoners, a weaponized SWAT, swaggering FBI, charges of domestic terrorism, and disinformation when people on the right exercise their free speech. The National Security Agency is running a surveillance state behind the protective curtain of national security. The immediate threat facing the nation is the fact that people no longer govern the country. Instead, the government is increasingly weaponized against the people it is meant to serve. I heard a great description of the Ruthless podcast by John Podhoretz today. He talked about it's a bunch of Republican activists playing clips of Democrats and just giggling. It's turned into a giggle podcast. I thought that was accurate. I wish Tucker Carlson was doing a nightly show. All right, his opening segments, all right, they were incredibly powerful. He claimed that he primarily wrote them himself. I'm glad he's doing interviews, but I wish he was doing a nightly show, man. But Jesse, he's definitely doing the Lord's work. The protests over the killing of George Floyd, all right? The summer of George was obviously not about race. It was about destabilizing the Trump administration, part of the left's belief that structures in society are the problem, pull society down for the purpose of revolution. That is what the left wants. Most effective tool for defanging the deep state is attacking job protections for the 50,000 federal workers who manage the details and enforce policy. So if you undo Schedule F, right, President Trump would be free to fire anyone in this civil service category who does not comply with his orders. Well, that sounds good to me. Trump's roiling actions, the Washington Post reported last week, have generated workplace fear, confusion, anger. Never good traits for any organization. The breathtaking scope and sudden implementation of his moves, some with dubious legality, stunned workers and citizens alike as Trump tries to expand the powers of the presidency. Well, maybe take back control of the government from the unelected. So Trump's appointment of Russell Vought, all right, remember this guy is Trump's Cromwell. So if you watched any of the Hillary Mantel series, you read the books, you saw the BBC adaptations about Thomas Cromwell, really good historical fiction. So Wolf Hall is the name of the series. And she died recently, but she did Wolf Hall and then Bring Up the Bodies and then The Mirror and the Light. So think of the OMB as the central nerve system for the executive branch, developing the president's budget, implementing, managing his policies and priorities, the existing government programs, overseeing agency rules. This makes the OMB director like the orchestra conductor for the federal branch. Vought is not just conducting an orchestra. He is spearheading an existential challenge to Congress's core constitutional power of the purse. They don't really work with that metaphor of conducting an orchestra. He is challenging the power of the purse, the authority to direct and control how federal funds are spent. I want people who think similarly to me and who are on my side to be running things. That's where I'm coming from. The broader audience for Russ Vought's invective is a substantial minority of Americans with authoritarian predispositions, particularly white authoritarians. The villains in this right-wing account of American politics are liberals and Democrats. What is the deep state that Vought and his reactionary Confederates want to crush? Anyone in the government who is liberal or Democrat who supports the liberal democratic agenda. People who think like this, they are representative of a paranoid anti-government fringe. Trump, to rationalize his own crimes and corruption, has constructed a series of beliefs where a weaponized government pursues innocent citizens for political reasons. Well, that sounds a lot like the Biden administration. Lawrence Tribe at Harvard is not happy. The apocalyptic tone adopted by the MAGA minions. Wait, what about, I thought it was people on the left who are adopting the apocalyptic tone. Reflects a rhetorically effective, if not especially original, plan to confuse and disarm the resistance, to disable the limited critical faculties of those in opposition, create political paralysis, enabling MAGA to rule largely unchallenged. Sounds good to me. So he wants to cut spending. Wants to cut $5 billion off Head Start, $4 billion off low-income energy assistance, Department of Housing and Urban Development, $26 billion. Sounds good to me. Get rid of Section 8 vouchers. Right? Why should you have to live next to someone who's being subsidized by Section 8 vouchers? And then cut Medicaid by $1.1 trillion and Medicare by $800 billion over 10 years. They want spending reductions in the Civil Rights Division. I would love to get rid of the Civil Rights Division. Eliminate the equity-obsessed Community Relations Service. I'm down with that. Get rid of State Criminal Alien Assistance Program. Yep, I'm down with that. And restructure the FBI to disarm and defang its weaponized posture to Americans who do not share left-wing politics. He wants to cut the EPA's budget. He wants to create a consensus of America as a nation under God with unique interests worthy of defending that flow from its people, institutions, and history, where individuals' enjoyment of freedom is based on just laws and healthy communities. Wow, I'm down with that. He was a key advisor to the Heritage Foundation's Project 25. He sees his role as director of the OMB as an approximation of the president's mind as it pertains to the policy, while always being ready with options to affect that agenda within existing legal authorities. Sounds good to me. What is on top of the president's agenda? Wait, is my sound is low. Sorry. Aside from being low. What the hell? Aside from being low. Let's see. Maybe I'll get my sound together and play a little bit from our good friend, Jesse Waters.
Like a typhoon, and there's a lot more rain in the forecast.
The first 2 weeks have been probably, they say, the most successful 2 weeks in the history of any presidency. Now all we have to do is keep it going for another couple of hundred weeks.
Joe rode a bicycle, 47's flooring a Ferrari. Quote, Trump has made public appearances and taken media questions almost every single day. Each EO signing turns into a press conference. Every trip on Air Force One, an impromptu gaggle with hacks. Trump has dominated every moment of the news agenda. Joe Biden, he is not. This isn't by accident. Trump's inner circle has been plotting for years.
So what we've got to do is just hit, and keep it. It's momentum, momentum, momentum. The opposition party is the media. And the media can only, because they're dumb and they're lazy, they can only focus on one thing at a time. All we have to do is flood the zone. Every day we hit them with 3 things. They'll bite on one, and we'll get all of our stuff done. Bang, bang, bang. These guys will never be able to recover. But we got to start with muzzle velocity.
The momentum continued today. Attorney General Pam Bondi dropping the investigation into Project Veritas. Remember, they got their hands on Ashley Biden's diary back in 2020. And Bondi's suing Illinois and Chicago for interfering with ICE deportations. Secretary Rubio is now in charge of the persnickety librarians at the National Archives. Remember the ones who kicked off the Trump raid? And the president met with Congress to lay out his tax plan. Listen.
No tax on tips, which is obviously a very public campaign promise that the president made. No tax on seniors' Social Security. No tax on overtime pay. Renewing President Trump's 2017 middle-class tax cuts. Again, these are the president's priorities. Adjusting the SALT cap, eliminate all the special tax breaks for billionaire sports team owners, close the carried interest tax deduction loophole, tax cuts for Made in America products. This will be the largest tax cut in history for middle-class working Americans.
Trump isn't just cleaning house. He's doing some redecorating.
The stories of legends like Washington, Winthrop, and Williams remind us that without faith in God, there would be no American story. Every citizen should be proud of this exceptional heritage. I have signed an executive order to resume the process of creating a new national park full of statues of the greatest Americans who ever lived.
The president attended a national prayer breakfast today, and where he told us how facing death changed his life.
None of us knows exactly when our time on earth will be over. You never know. A truth I confronted a few short months ago. If I was a little more than that 90-degree angle, it would be no good. And if I was a little less, it would be no good. It had to be perfect. The thing went right along the edge. It didn't affect my hair. Can you believe that? Might have touched it, but not where it counts. Not the skin part. But it's, no, honestly, it changed something in me. I feel even stronger. I believed in God, but I feel much more strongly about it. Something happened. So, thank you.
Then Trump called for every American to bring God back into their lives.
We want to come together, and the happiest, the person, the element, the everything that's going to be happy. People of religion are going to be happy again. And I really believe you can't be happy without religion, without that belief. I really believe it. I just don't see how you can be. So let's bring religion back. Let's bring God back into our lives.
And then we learned what motivates the president.
One floor below us, Reverend Graham's statue stands with an open Bible. The page turned to a letter from the Apostle Paul, which reads, "Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." Never give up. Never, ever give up. You can't. How about me? If I would have given up, I would not be here right now. Who the hell knows where I'd be? It might not be a good place. If it was up to the Democrats, it would not be a good place at all. Never, ever give up.
Jillian Michaels is the host of the Keeping It Real podcast. All right, Jillian, you strike me as someone who may...
All right, back to the New York Times essay on the Russell Vogt, the head of Donald Trump's Office of Management and Budget. And they're quite concerned about Russell Vogt. So this is what he thinks should be on top of the president's agenda. Right? The need to use aggressive force of the vast powers of the executive branch to return power to the American people. Sounds good to me. This requires boldness and self-denial, boldness to bend and break the bureaucracy to the president's will, and self-denial to use the bureaucratic machine to send power away from Washington. Yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. I'm thrilled that this guy is the new head of the Office of Management and Budget. All right, this is Halperin talking to Michael Smerconish.
Yeah, they lapse back into the usual practices. Correct. Mark, like you, I have, I did yesterday, and anytime I'm able, I watch those pressers when he's sitting at the Resolute desk and signing proclamations and orders. And I, too, found yesterday's astounding. What am I talking about?
Well, this was before the press conference and before the photo op with Bibi before the press conference. And I was just in a position during my day where I could watch the whole thing. We've seen these now. I predicted somewhat tongue-in-cheek a few weeks ago when these started, these events where he just sits there and signs and takes questions, that he would answer more questions from the media before Valentine's Day than Joe Biden did in 2024. I think he may answer more questions before Valentine's Day than Joe Biden took in his entire presidency, because these things have like 70 questions each in them. He made a ton of news. He said, for instance, there's a little bit of coverage of this today. He said that he's left instructions that if Iran assassinates him, that Iran should be obliterated. Now, as David Singer and others have pointed out, presidents don't really get to leave instructions like that. The next president, J.D. Vance, would get to decide. But he talked about wanting to personally investigate the building of the high-speed rail in California. He talked about the Department of Education and a bunch of other stuff. And it's kind of will be lost to not just news coverage, but to history to some extent, because there's just too much happening. But this is a style of communicating. I don't know how self-consciously he's doing it for the contrast with Joe Biden, who did not and honestly could not have done what Trump is doing. And again, it doesn't mean everything he says is smart. It doesn't mean he's not lying some of the time. But just the concept of sitting there and answering question after question from the White House pool is extraordinary. None of us have ever seen this. And I laughed yesterday because remember, during the transition, Trump would go days on end without being in public. And we said, I wonder if this is going to carry over to the White House, where there'll be days on end when we don't hear from him. And now pretty much daily, we hear this this unprecedented performance of signing and talking.
And like you, I'm sure, I pick up the remote because I want to see who is taking it live. And they're struggling. Fox, it's a no-brainer. They're going to take it live. The rest just don't know. How much of this should we take? What should we say? How much do we fact check?
Did you take it yesterday?
I did not. I saw some of the coverage on CNN, all of the coverage on Fox. When I was looking, I saw none of it on MSN.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. They've been taking less. It's been what you might think, which is Fox almost always takes it, CNN takes it sometimes, MSNBC almost never takes it.
Mark, I advanced here and on CNN on Saturday that the dropping of the DEI conversation in the context of the Washington catastrophe, I said was, well, A, he believes what he says about DEI, but he deliberately wanted to draw attention away from the trifecta of congressional hearings last Thursday, which was Kennedy, Gabbard, and Kash Patel. I'm surprised. It looks like everybody's getting confirmed. But talk to me about whether Mark Halperin thinks there's a method to his madness in terms of what he'll drop on a particular day, depending on what else is in the news as a distraction.
So all politicians, if they've got any sense at all, engage in the tactic of, we're dealing with a bad story, we're dealing with a story we don't want to get scrutiny, let's change the subject. Trump is unmatched in not only analyzing the situation and saying, today's the day I need to change the subject, but knowing how to calibrate, how big is the distraction, right? Like how big is the distraction required to be to get us off, the USAID story and the General Elon Musk story. Well, what he did yesterday was huge. And I don't think it's the main reason he did it, but he knows when and how to do it to create.
All right, back to the New York Times here. One professor says that Russell Vought has the potential to be the most influential member of Trump's inner circle. He knows his way around Washington, knows his way around the White House. He served as OMB director at the end of the first Trump administration, and he has gained a reputation as a true zealot and a highly effective one. All right, it's easy to be a zealot, not so easy to be a highly effective one. And so this tsunami of executive orders and directives that the president is the head of the executive branch with the power to decide how to administer laws passed by Congress, and with the power to fire any federal official anywhere in the executive branch who does not follow his directives. All right, this is Russell Vought, who is much of the brain power behind this.
The distraction. Interestingly, this morning at 9 o'clock Eastern time, MSNBC and CNN were covering the Gaza story. Fox was covering Doge. So he didn't change the subject for them. He may not care about that because he's probably happy with their Doge coverage. But I think that, again, you could be the best funded show in the world, including yours, and you can't cover everything that's happening. It's just, what he said yesterday about Iran was incredible, but there's just no way to cover. There's just no way to cover it all. And I think Trump is extremely aware of that. And again, more and more, it's clear that the Democrats, Trump's team spent all of 2024 preparing to win and to govern quickly in the transition where they governed, outside in an unprecedented fashion, and then to get off to a fast start. And it's clear that the Democrats, for a variety of reasons, including that they thought Kamala Harris was going to win, they're not prepared. And so part of why Trump is doing so well now by some standards is the Democrats just aren't geared up to oppose him. And they're having this internal discussion, not about why they lost the election, because there's no time for that right now in most quarters, but what pitches to swing at. There's a consensus, don't swing at the USAID pitch because the American people don't think that's popular. But defining a set of standards about what to swing at is really challenging. And so when Trump says student body right for the next 2 days, we're all going to talk about Gaza, what are the Democrats supposed to say? Do they start debating that? Or do they try to break through by criticizing Musk or whatever it is that they think is the right pitch to swing at? It's very difficult for them.
In your Wide World of News Today newsletter, you say Tuesday was another day when the inability of Democrats to settle on a strategy for combating Donald Trump was on vivid display. And then you summarize different schools of thought, and you quote from the Ruth Marcus column that's getting a lot of attention, which begins, quote, "No president in history has caused more damage to the nation more quickly," and then goes on to explain why that's the case in her opinion. Speak to that.
Well, at a time when the Democrats are trying to get unity around things like why did they lose the election, they do have unity around what Ruth Marcus wrote. They do believe that what Trump is doing is illegal. It's bad for America. It's bad for the world. It's unconstitutional in some cases, and that at this time, anyone who can do anything, whether it's political or legal or whatever, to try to stop Trump must act. So there's great agreement around that. The problem, if you read Ruth Marcus's column, or you listen to Chuck Schumer, or you listen to Governor Polis, or whoever you want to listen to, is okay. So we must stop him. How do we do it? What's the day-to-day activities we need to engage in to stop him, and which ones do we choose? And as I said, you saw a very widely discussed Politico story yesterday in which Rahm Emanuel and David Axelrod say, don't do USAID. Don't do it because it's not a winning argument no matter what. Okay, so don't stop him there, but should you stop him from trying to fire people at the CIA? Should you stop him from trying to eliminate the Department of Education? It's very difficult to figure out what to do, and you see that in the divisions in the party. And then you see them do a press conference where Ilhan Omar, one of the members of the squad, is front and center, inspirational to tens of millions of Americans. But Republicans look at that and say, if you think you're going to stop Donald Trump's activities now with Ilhan Omar, you're making a big mistake.
And Republicans, meanwhile, are lockstep, as evidenced by the fact that Kennedy, Gabbard, and Patel are probably going to get confirmed in the Senate.
Well, they're lockstep on the confirmations, and Tom Cotton, to his credit, said weeks ago everybody was going to be confirmed after Matt Gaetz withdrew. They're not lockstep everywhere, right? There are concerns about USAID. There are concerns about some of the national security firings. There's concerns about some of the freeze, which is kind of on again, off again, unclear again about government spending. So there are little wisps of maybe not all Republicans are on board.
All right, let's get back to Jesse here.
Each other's hands for years. When Democrats needed a shoulder to cry on, legacy media was there for support. But now they're both hot messes. The head of Axios says liberal media has never been weaker.
For the first time in our lifetimes, I would argue the media ecosystem favors the right more than it favors the left. The MAGA movement, podcasts, X, how people get information, favors Republicans and really favors Trump. And so he has everything working for him in terms of his ability to do a lot fast and stretch the boundaries of what we're used to in terms of the power of the presidency.
And the Democrats are just downright toxic.
Why is the Democratic Party viewed as toxic by so many? Like, even people inside the party acknowledge that.
I think their primary currency was shaming and scolding and talking down to people and telling them, hey, I know better than you, or you're dopes, or you're a bro, or you're ignorant, or, don't you know, how can you be this dumb? If you go to an extreme and you become a boutique kind of a proposition, then you're going to lose the argument.
How do Democrats win back white men like yourself?
I don't know, and truthfully, I'm not sure if that's possible, to be honest.
They're dying on the strangest hills too.
He's describing what is currently the dumbest strategy in politics, which is Democrats taking the 20% side of every 80-20 issue in America. USAID, people want this pared down. They want it streamlined. They want to know where the money is going. Democrats have a meltdown. Today, Donald Trump signs executive order on keeping boys out of girls' sports. Democrats take the 20 side of that issue as well. All these issues, this is like Trump's superpower, finding a bunch of 80-20 issues, getting on the 80, and everybody who's sort of reflexively against him gets on the 20. And now the Democratic Party has like a 31% approval rating. This is why.
It's a simple fix. All the left has to do is listen. But Democrats are defiant. They have no interest in getting it together. Not a book plug, but might as well be. So instead, they keep latching on to identity politics.
It's not pocketbook issues. I don't want to interrupt you. I thought it was about eggs. Right. We're not talking about
it's not anymore.
It's not about it was never about eggs. Yeah. It was about race. And if we're honest, if I see something, say something. We've been told that since we were kids. If you see something, say something. It's not about eggs.
It is.
It's not about. It's not. It's about making sure that there is white supremacy in this country. And if we're honest, we will say that.
The left is miserable, which is why Americans voted them out. All they care about is victimology.
I'm not talking about how you feel. I'm talking about how I feel. Me, a black woman in this country. I got a law degree, a master's, and 2 bachelors. Probably more education than all of y'all added up together at this table, right? And I have always been the least paid person on payroll at every institution I have worked in. And it's not because...
Even in the White House?
Even in the White House.
Well, whose fault is that? I don't think he worked.
She has such a nice personality. She seems like such a lovely lady. Who wouldn't want to have her around and pay her the big bucks?
For George W. or Trump.
Did that argument not convince you? AOC says you're a victim of a vast right-wing conspiracy.
It was really hard watching people and communities that I am aligned with fall for right-wing misinformation.
Yeah, that's not what happened. People just got tired of Democrats lying. So the whole party's in shambles, and Pelosi not helping. She's twisting the knife in the big guy's back. She says things would have been worse if Biden was at the top of the ticket.
Well, all I know is that we won a seat in the House. We did not lose any seats. You know, people were like, "Whoa, the Democrats lost." No, we did not. I think it would have been quite different with President Biden at the top of the ticket.
She still hasn't even talked to Joe or Jill, but she says she would coup him again for the children.
The former First Lady, Jill Biden, has spoken out saying she was disappointed in you. Is there any way to patch that up? Have you spoken to the
Well, I
former
certainly
president?
hope so. No, I haven't. But the fact is that we're all on a mission for the American people, for America's working families. My whole passion about being in politics is for the children. So what is it that we're doing for the children? I think that it would have been important for the children to not have Donald Trump be president of the United States.
Sorry, kids, Trump's back, and so is the golden age. The rest of the party should take that as a warning call. If you want to salvage whatever political careers you have left, scrap everything and start over. Howard Dean screamed it the best.
The Democrats need to have a complete reboot. They've been functioning inside the Beltway, and that's what their tendency is. The name Democrat has been branded really badly, and we don't run enough local candidates to unbrand it. We leave whole swaths of legislative seats unchallenged in red states. That is insane.
Jimmy Fail is the host of Fox News.
Okay, I got some other video clips lined up. Interesting discussion on real clear
Richard,
politics.
Because Trump wants to make it the Riviera of the Mediterranean. Well, that would be next level.
Well, but seriously, guys, it's sort of an interesting piece of history. I mean, the Gaza Strip has been under the control over the last thousands of years of the Egyptians, the Philistines. It was part of the Ottoman Empire for many years. The British took over the mandate, and then the Egyptians occupied it in the 48 War. And they were controlling that through until 67. So that piece of land, but they wouldn't let the people who live there, who were under their control, become Egyptians, right? Although Egypt was, this whole region, the borders were shifting all the time. So Gaza is a piece of real estate that has been, in many hands over many centuries, and there is no distinct, history for this land and what it is and what it's supposed to be. So it is out of the box because I think the idea of embracing this is, people think, well, my goodness, now it's all going to be our problem. But the reality is you need to change the culture so profoundly there. And the UN simply was reinforcing the kind of bad culture that was leading to the events of October 7th. So, sometimes the best way to manage a problem is to really take ownership of it, and then you can really change things as opposed to this arm's length thing, give it to the UN, and then have them turn it over to Hamas. So
okay, but hold on a second. So, Carl, I want to come to you on this. Like Richard makes a point. I mean, why hasn't Jordan or Egypt? Why haven't they taken in Palestinians? Not just in recent times, but over the last decades as this problem has gone on. And is that such a bad idea that you ask some of these countries in the region to take us? Maybe they don't take all 1.9 million or however many there are, but to have some ownership of this, because up until now they've been sort of hands off saying, look, we don't want any of these refugees.
Well, Jordan took a lot of them in a couple of different tranches after these wars Richard's talking about, and they almost destabilized, the government. This is a restive group of people who feel that that Israel is their rightful home, and they've been radicalized over generations now. I mean, Israel was created in 1948. These people have been generation after generation have been taught to hate Israel. It's not on the maps of their country in the last 2 decades since the time Richard's talking about when Israel pulled out of Gaza. Hamas has gone in there. First Saudi Arabia, and then later the Iranians, pay these very radical mullahs to go there. The schools, the educational system preaches hate. Well, it's taken root. And, Trump ruminating the way he does, he thinking aloud. We're not used to presidents doing that. And Richard's right. I mean, we do need, something has to change other than the status quo. But you can't wish 1.9 million people away. The Arab countries aren't going to take them. And so the only solution there is what Richard said. It's a culture change, but it's not going to look, removing people forcibly. They were already removed in their minds from Israel. Removing them again is going to bring on another 60 years of hate. You need to change the culture, but you need to maybe tie the aid to some reform, political reform, and those people have to be made to feel that they have a stake in where they live. If you're going to turn it into the Riviera of the Mediterranean, those people have to own part of it. They're not going to be moved. That's a war crime. That's ethnic cleansing. They're going to be there, and they have to be invested in this, profit from it, and see a better future. That the United States can help do that, but let's not pretend we can just move them somewhere.
Okay,
that's my view.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I think ethnic cleansing is sort of a loaded term. I'm not sure if Trump's proposing killing them. He might be proposed, relocating them, which maybe forced relocation is considered.
It's pretty much close. It's pretty close to a war crime, Tom.
Well, but it is interesting, Carl, because so many of the countries that Trump is talking about encouraging the residents of that piece of geography to move to are countries that have been the source of emigration out of those countries into Europe. And to some extent, it's kind of what goes around comes around. I mean, if you're going to be shipping your people into Western Europe, is it really so unjust to say, you know what, you've been shipping people out, you're going to take some people for a while. And by the way, there is no big ethnic difference there between the people living in Gaza and the people living a few miles away in Egypt. They were under common rule for hundreds of years. And then again, most recently through until the 1967 war. So, I mean, the idea that somehow you say to Egypt, look, this was your problem. You occupied this. You didn't absorb them before. You made a mistake. You should absorb them now. It's different, right? But when you kind of lay it out like that, I don't think it's quite as shocking as it seems.
Okay, but Richard, hold on. What is shocking is Donald Trump, who ran for office on
temporarily out of the government in responding to what the president has just done. And Netanyahu will come home with all kinds of...
Sorry, I was muted. So this is Dan Senor's podcast, Trump and the Future of Gaza, with Rich Goldberg.
Tangible policy victories on Iran, on the United Nations, on just the support generally for Israel, now on the idea of breaking out of the box on Gaza and not forcing Israel into a situation to accept a Hamas return to Gaza. That is already changing the dynamic inside his coalition, inside his government.
So there's two ways you can think about that, Rich. The hopeful view, I mean, let's think about this from the perspective of the hostage families, those who still have loved ones in Gaza. One way to look at it is, wow, this holds the government together while, because we do know that Trump and Witkoff and the team do want Israel to proceed to phase 2 of the deal. So one way to look at it is this creates a path for all the reasons you're saying for Netanyahu's government to hold together while he pursues phase 2 of the deal, which results in more Israelis coming back, which is extremely important. That's one reaction. The other reaction could be, and I know you and I talked about this last night, we're both in touch with hostage families, is one of, let's just say, apprehension, which is, wait a minute, like you say, he's breaking out of the box, turning the chessboard upside down and letting the pieces scramble all over the place, however you want to put it. Isn't there a risk that Hamas says, we intend to be in power when all this is over, and you're basically saying we're out? Now, Israel has been saying from the beginning of this negotiating process that in no world will Hamas still be in power when this war ends. And the United States has been saying there's no way that Hamas will be in power. And Trump said yesterday there's no way that Hamas will be in power. That is not a new idea. The question is, does the way Trump laid things out take things to a whole other level of signaling to Hamas they're done? And do you cross a point where Hamas says, we're now transitioning from living to fight another day, which is, I think, the mode they're in right now, which is why they're incentivized to stay in the game and still negotiate, because they're, even though there's this paradox where, Israel says there's no way Hamas will be in power, but Hamas says, yeah, we're gonna hang in there. And they both have their own view, Israel and Hamas, of where this whole process is going. Is the U.S. taking it to a whole other level and saying, not only is Hamas not going to be in power, but we're going to be in Gaza? And could that potentially put this trajectory we had been on, God willing, we are still on, where hostages are being returned, in jeopardy?
So I first of all, let's absolutely agree.
Those in Israel is that, because I keep focusing and have been on this podcast over the last few months, unlike most negotiations, call it Begin and Sadat, Israel and Egypt, call it the Abraham Accords, pick your Israel and Jordan in the mid-90s, the negotiation with King Hussein. In every one of these deals, there's basically, I hate to use the cliche, but I'll use it, a win-win. This negotiation, there is no win-win. It's zero sum. Israel wants all the hostages back, and it wants Hamas gone forever. Hamas wants to retake Gaza. So, and they both have agreed to a path where they both can envision they can each achieve these two outcomes that are in direct conflict with one another. So one side has to be wrong. And it's clear that Hamas has calculated we can play for time. If we can get Israel out of Gaza and we can gradually retake Gaza and rebuild Gaza and reassert our authority, if we're on a path to doing that, we're winning. And every day Israel's not in Gaza, we can do that. And Israel can say all it wants that Hamas is not going to be in power. Time will tell. And they could have the same reaction to what Trump said last night, which is, okay, the president thinks the U.S. is going to run with Gaza. Good luck. All we know is each day we're still here, we're reasserting ourselves, and we make that possibility less likely. Again, I'm not getting into this is total speculative.
No, exactly. It's all speculative.
Right.
And in the end, if you come to the president with that statement, with that assessment, which is the sober assessment of the path you're on, he, as is his practice, says, I reject the premise here. I reject the options you've brought. I want more options. Why are we in this box? Why can't somebody else be another option be on the table? So he's thrown more options on the table.
Yeah.
And now it's up to all the stakeholders to react.
And putting pressure on the region to do more. Again, as I've said, the U.S. has operated like Egypt does the U.S. a favor by simply, complying with the Camp David agreement of, 40 plus years ago, and has no responsibility for figuring out security inside Gaza. That's Israel's problem. And the president's saying, guess what, guys? It's not your problem too. And, Jordan, this is your problem too. And the Sunni Gulf, like, you get kind of having a hands-off approach and just saying from your capitals throughout the Gulf, there needs to be a Palestinian state. Okay, guys, well, this is now your problem too. So I do think that is a powerful input here. Before we wrap, Rich, I want to talk to you about this. There were a number of executive orders on the UN human rights.
I'm sorry, I didn't have the timestamps lined up correctly. I'm embarrassed. Eek. All right, Mark Halperin's got an interesting tweet. Egg prices, Gaza, Doge, yeah, sure, but if Donald Trump doesn't do something stat about the fact that everyone I know, adults and kids, has the flu, COVID, a cold, and or massive vomiting, I myself will draft articles of impeachment and deliver them to Speaker Johnson. And then Skeptical Doc tweets to Halperin, I'm a primary care physician at one of our elite liberal enclaves. You should have been in my office yesterday. I'm literally not sure what to do with some of these liberal patients. It is severe depression on top of tantrums, on top of severe acting out. And here is this
that
doc.
I spoke about before the election, and that's about the mental health of some Americans in the wake of Donald Trump's victory. There's certain parts of your bio that I know you don't want to talk about, understandably so, but just tell people what kind of doctor you are, where you live, and what your practice is, and then we'll get into the issue at hand.
So I am an internal medicine physician, general internist. I take care of people in all walks of life. Here, I live here in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and my patients are literally from all walks of life. I go all the way from cowboys and ranchers all the way up to billionaires, basically. So it's just all kinds of people all in between.
If you've ever been to Jackson, you know the doctor is correct. That's what you get in Jackson. Pretty much anywhere you go in Jackson, you're going to see a big cross-section of people across from around the country. So I said my concern, if Donald Trump won, I said this before the election, was that it was going to be more troubling to a lot of people, tens of millions. Because when he won in 2016, it was unexpected. It was a bit of a fluke. And there was even some hope that he would be a different kind of person than Democrats feared he'd be, and that Hillary Clinton warned he would be. But that a re-election of Donald Trump after January 6th, after what he did during the first term, would cause, unfortunately, a lot of Americans to become deeply troubled about America, about what would happen to the country, what would happen to their children. And I was pleasantly surprised in the immediate aftermath of his election that while there were some signs that might happen, it seemed more muted than I had feared. However, in the last month or so, anecdotally, I have seen what I feared would occur, which is there's some really upset people as he's taken office, as they've kind of dealt with the reality of it. So talk about, Doctor, your patients that you've treated and spoken to, and how the ones who opposed Donald Trump's election have been coping with it.
Well, the first thing I would say is I am very, very careful when I talk to patients about expressing any of my own political views. That is never done in the office. But what has happened is I am just bombarded with all kinds of things all the time. I would say, to be fair, to set it up, for when Biden was the president, I had all kinds of stuff from the other side. But it has been extremely intense. The last, the week or two after the election was pretty intense. It then calmed down, and now it's really back up. We are dealing with depression, anxiety, all kinds of medical problems that are related to that, like insomnia, chest pain, chest pressure. And then there's some genuine fear, panic. I hear things from people all the time that I don't want to repeat because they're people I don't think would believe me. That just people have these very, very severe anxieties about what is going to happen to them. And it is affecting their life. The other thing I would add, and I think even more unfortunately, is the elections always happen right around the holidays. And I've been a physician for 30 years. I've never seen this happen before where, to this level where people just completely disinvited their families. And, there's just this huge breach in normal family dynamics. And I'll be honest with you, it's bad I've had, young people in my office crying because, grandma told them not to come or whatever. But then weeks later, I've had the people who did the disinviting get all emotional because they don't know how to get themselves out of the spiral they're in with their family members.
Yeah.
It's really, really interesting. I haven't seen anything. I told you in the email that I was a physician during 9/11, and it was like this then, but it was everybody. This is just about as intense, but it's not everybody. And it's people are having real crises.
Yeah. Doctor, the people who come in, I know everybody's going to be different, but in general, do they come in and they say, I can't sleep, I'm having a stomachache because Donald Trump was elected? Or are they not sharing that that's the reason?
So I think it has a lot to do with Donald Trump. And the fears of what he's going to do or what's happening in the country. I would also add, I think it's a more basic thing than that. And it's that we've gotten ourselves on all sides into this mindset that everything is the worst thing ever. We have the worst hurricanes. We have the worst, this was the worst election. I mean, the outcome was going to be the worst no matter who won. It's like we're playing this game of who can get to the bottom faster. And people are not handling that well. The other thing I would add, and I guess I would say on both sides too, is this whole, if you don't agree with everything I think is right, then you are a horrible person, and I don't want to talk to you ever again. And when people behave like that, they become very, very isolated, and then they don't have the normal human interactions to really go on with life.
Yeah.
And then they end up with these severe mental health problems.
Yeah. How are you treating these patients, since you're not a mental health expert or doctor? Are you referring them? Are you prescribing? How are you trying to help them?
Well, so that's a very good question that has to do with a lot of what you were just talking to the congressman about. So we have a mental health crisis in this country. It's not just here in Jackson Hole. It's everywhere, and we have very, very limited resources. The hospital I work for is, doing calisthenics, trying to get the mental health. I mean, just heroic efforts to try to get the mental health up to what would be helpful for people. And this is going on everywhere in the country. And we as primary care providers, I'm having to do all kinds of mental health, type interactions and therapies that I've never done before. And it is, it can be very, very intense for all of us. I think if you would ask any primary care doctor in the country, they would tell you the same thing.
Yeah. So Jackson, sorry, go ahead.
Go right ahead.
Jackson's it's a big place, but small community. There probably aren't that. Are you saying there's no?
Wow, it sure sounds like Donald Trump is triggering the libs.
No place to refer people because they're all booked up.
They're all booked up. The ones that are available. That we have a manpower shortage, and it's all over the country. It's not just Jackson.
And what about telemedicine? Is there people who refer them to online
help? So there is telemedicine, but that has its own problems. A lot of states don't allow doctors to do that over state lines. As an internist, it's difficult to deal with lots of things that have to do with looking at people's bodies and checking things out over the computer. Psychiatrists don't have that problem, but the issue even is that there's really not enough psychiatrists to even do telemedicine. Yeah. It's really that big of a crisis.
Yeah. So raise your hand if you want to get into the conversation.
Colleagues, we become suspicious that the way that social media kind of promotes more destructive dialogue versus constructive dialogue is part of the reason that the reactions to these types of things is so profound. And he was getting at it when he's talking about everything's the worst all of the time. Yep. And I become more concerned that social media and that algorithm is actually driving poor kind of mental health in general.
It's a great question, great point. Dr. Burnett.
I would absolutely agree with that. And I've been a physician all the way back to the early 1990s, where we did not have social media. We did not even have the internet. And I think there's two or three things going on. The social media, where everything is a thought bomb. We try to just detonate each other all the time, and instead of really sitting down and talking through issues rationally. That's why I like this platform. I really like to see people sit down and talk through things without calling each other names and screaming and yelling. But I would also add that the political shows on all sides, where everyone is just screaming at each other all the time, it causes this distress in a lot of people that comes out in my office when I'm talking to them.
Yeah.
And I really, I think we've really kind of gone off the rails as a society in a lot of things and how we interact with each other.
Yeah, well said. Let me ask you both. How could two-way help the crisis you see amongst your patients? What kind of programs could we do? What kind of things could we do to try to help alleviate this mental health, whether you want to call it a crisis or not?
Well, I would say that from my perspective, and I've actually done this with patients where I think that allowing perspective across those different, having somebody on that's reasonable on one side, or seeing somebody who voted for Trump or voted for Biden but seems like a reasonable person in other ways, and kind of really helping to de-escalate that dialogue and then bring it back to actually just people talking like they used to, is probably one of the most profoundly useful components of two-way to begin with. So continuing with that, encouraging it, is, I think, just really critical from the standpoint of just public mental health.
Okay, on this morning's show, there was a Sikh doctor who was not particularly thrilled about Barack Obama's Affordable Care Act.
The Affordable Care Act is done for America.
There isn't anything good.
Nothing.
I don't have a solution, so I'm not someone you want to.
But you don't see any. How about the fact that more people are covered? Is that good?
I think that's great. Yeah, but I feel like there would be a better way to do it. I don't even want to speak on policy. It's completely above my head.
Yeah.
But we'll say that the ACA has made premiums for everyone go up. It has completely changed how hospitals bill, and it's basically just a giant corporate handout. It's removed all the power from the doctors and given it to a bunch of bureaucrats. If you see what hospital administrator, if you look at a graph of like number of hospital administrators and bureaucrats, it is exponential. And so it's all about how to squeeze every dollar out of the whatever, if they're squeezing it out of the state funds or the federal government grants.
Yeah, why does it seem that the more of these useless administrators you get, right, the less competent K you get, the more the bureaucracy leans left?
Or whatever it is. And so, it used to be, and I'm not saying that, this was better, but it used to be that if you, God forbid, are admitted, with pneumonia to the hospital, where you're going to come in, we're going to see you in the emergency department, that doctor will bill you. We're going to do an x-ray, we'll bill you for that. We'll do a CAT scan, bill you, give you some antibiotics, bill you, hospital room is X dollars a night. Okay, that's your bill, right? What the ACA did is it established what's called the DRG, the diagnostic related group. And so now what it is that if you're admitted for pneumonia, Medicare says, I'm going to give you $5,000 to the hospital. That's it. So you better do everything and treat the patient, get them better, and then kick them out of the hospital. And if you spend $3,000, you get to keep the $2,000. Okay.
Right.
And so now it's instead of, fee for service, it's kind of fee for, I don't know. And so a lot of hospitals just lost money. I mean, I trained in Brooklyn. The amount of Brooklyn hospitals that closed down, there's a ton. I can name 10.
Yep.
And so it killed the city hospital. I'm not a fan. I don't want socialist medicine either.
Yep. Doctor, thank you. We're going to dip back in for President Trump because he's saying
Okay, I finally got the timestamp that I wanted with the discussion of Trump and Gaza.
Very unique situation in the world of how the international community, as it's called, treats the Palestinians, particularly the Palestinians in Gaza. For nearly 16 months, there's been one place in the world where you're not allowed to be a refugee. You're not allowed to leave a war zone by force, by fiat of the international community. It's Gaza. Egypt can't let the wall down, let people come across the border, settle in Sinai. Other Arab countries can't take Palestinians who want to leave. No one's allowed to touch a refugee from Gaza. They have to stay in Gaza and just move around and be inside a war-torn situation that the president has said, and that Steve Witkoff, his Middle East envoy, has just been there and reported in, is just a lot of devastation at this point after the war, with people coming back to the north under the phase one of the ceasefire deal and realizing there's not a lot left. Rebuilding is going to take 10 to 15 years, according to Steve Witkoff, who is a real estate developer. And Donald Trump has been saying now for a couple of weeks, hey, I want to see countries take people who are refugees who want to leave Gaza because there's nowhere to live. And they want to have sanitary lives and healthcare and education, and they want to have a better future. While Gaza takes over a decade to rebuild, and by the way, de-radicalize as you rebuild, which is sort of the big important piece of a rebuilding project in Gaza. How do you do that without Hamas in control or behind the scenes or waiting to come back to power, rebuilding? And so why is it that they oppose this? Well, it's because they already consider the people in Gaza to be refugees from Israel. For almost 77 years, this is one of the strongest political pawns to use, right? That there is a refugee population from 1948. They must return to Israel proper. It doesn't matter to them that Israel withdrew from Gaza 20 years ago, and they don't have occupation. They don't have territorial control of Gaza until this war. It doesn't matter to them that Egypt doesn't want anything to do with Gaza post-1967 and has washed their hands of Gaza and won't even allow one person to come across the border unless they're in some sort of hospitalization category and they've been pressured to let some wounded people in. To them, they have to be there as political pawns for all of this. Now, that being said, you have a ceasefire deal in place. You're in phase one. You're supposed to start negotiations for phase two. Phase two and phase three become far more complicated for the Israeli government because you start getting into the basic fundamental contradictions at the endpoints of this negotiation, and that are, you want to get the hostages out. And we heard the country to take Palestinian refugees out of Gaza. I think you could. I think there's a number of incentives that could be offered to countries that might be interested in doing so from a humanitarian perspective. Those could include elevating a country to major non-NATO ally status, if it's not there today. By the way, a stick could always be, if a certain country that you think should actually do this is unwilling to, threatening to remove that country's status as a major non-NATO ally. And that has to do with arms sales and just the perception of the closeness of our defense relationship, and it's an elevated status. It's something a lot of countries want. You could do that for them. You could do things in trade preferences. You could do things in financing deals and long-term strategic type economic infrastructure projects, like the Millennium Challenge Corporation that has these long, multi-year, multi-billion-dollar pipelines for massive big deal infrastructure projects. You could think much bigger as we talk about corridors, right? You've heard about the India, Saudi to Israel corridor. That's, this big infrastructure energy idea sitting behind normalization between Saudi and Israel. You could see things like that put on the table, that instead of running through this country, we'll run through your country instead, that the U.S. will support. So I think there's a lot of ways to incentivize countries when you're the United States.
Right, that's a good point. So all the Arab nations, every nation on earth apparently hates Trump's plan for Gaza, but the United States is the big dog, and the United States can create some incentives. And let's see how different countries respond to these incentives. Okay, John Podhoretz.
The liberal leftist embrace of the very redefinition of what it means to be human that I think is the secret sauce of the 2024 election in ways that people don't even begin to realize. Matt?
Right. I had that thought as well watching the signing ceremony for the executive order yesterday. The White House staged the signing very effectively, surrounding Trump with women and girls. And when Trump went down to sign the executive order, he kind of paused and he asked the girls, the younger girls especially, to come in and surround him. And they did. And it's just, the pictures are just extraordinary. And when I was watching this and looking at these images, I thought that the transgender issue was where the whole structure of wokeism began to break down. That when DEI, affirmative action, it's tied to long-standing issues in the American polity, right? It's about America's relation with the black minority, the legacy of slavery, segregation, and continued poverty among black communities in the inner cities. And so the woke movement began as the next iteration of the fight for black equality. That's how the sympathizers of wokeism understood it, right? Now, when you looked at what was happening early on with Black Lives Matter, you could see that this was much more radical and that it would lead to defund the police or abolish ICE or the jailbreak movement, right? But on the surface, especially for the people who put those signs out in their front lawn saying, in this house, we believe in all the good things and unicorns and rainbows and fairies, that's how it appealed. But then as the wokening continued, and especially under Biden, who allowed this ideology to just run rampant throughout the federal government, it pressed on this question of human nature, of whether you were born. It's in the Bible. It's right there in Genesis.
Human nature, though, it comes down to, do you think human nature is basically good or bad? Every right-wing perspective on life assumes that human nature is not basically good, and pretty much every left-wing perspective assumes that human nature is just wonderful.
Man and woman, right? And that was too much. And once you refuse to accept the woke definition of gender fluidity, once you say, what are you talking about? And moreover, that is harmful. It's harmful. It's for minors in particular, when you try to impose it on them, the whole superstructure begins to fall apart. And I think that was where the radicals and the Democrats went too far and created the conditions for this Trump revolution.
I watched the ceremony, and I agree it was extraordinary. And I suddenly had this other thought, which was that when I first got into conservative thought and sort of discovering it, one of the fun things about it intellectually was that counterintuitive ideas could turn out to be correct. For example, you know, it's intuitive when you see someone who doesn't have money, you think, oh, well, then we should provide for them, give them money. But it turns out that that has unintended consequences downstream, and maybe it's not such a good idea. And that's the conservative counterintuitive idea. And it was a double-edged sword because it's interesting and it's right, but it made it harder for people to come to your side because it requires an extra leap sort of in the chain of thinking. Suddenly, conservative thought is intuitive thought now. The radicals on the left have made it that easy. There is nothing more intuitive than saying girls will play with girls, boys will play with boys. The sex that you are is the sex that you are. And I think you could see this on a host of issues now, which I think explains sort of conservatism under Trump and why for the first time in so long, more people self-identify as Republicans than as Democrats. They've sort of.
Okay, let's leave it there. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. Right, who was that guy? All right, this is the crew at Commentary Magazine, and it's not a description.